Good morning. Good to see you all. I have the great pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker for today, Nanshin White. Nanshin trained at Mount Equity Zendo with Diane Benaj for many years in Pennsylvania, Diane Benaj being one of the great pioneers and matriarchs of Zen in North America. And Nanshin completed Shuso training in 2011 and received Lay Entrustment as a teacher from Diane in 2016. She was also a professor of economics at Bucknell University for a long time, and I think you might hear a little bit about that today. After retirement in 2017, Nanshin and her husband Tomei, where are you? Moved to Fargo, or Moorhead, sorry, and
sensitive to that.
Yeah. Minnesota, and founded Open Land Sangha in 2019. So there's a Soto Zen community up there now. Thank you for spreading the Dharma. She's a member of the Lay Zen Teachers Association and serves on the board of directors for the FM Interfaith Center. I just got to say, I've known Nanshin for a long time. When she moved up here, she made the effort to reach out here and make a connection to this community and to me personally. And I think a lot of us have benefited from her time here. She did a lot of practice with us when there was an opportunity, when the demands of her community may have been a little bit less up there. So a lot of you already know Nanshin well, but I'm just so grateful that you take the time to come down here and bring us the Dharma. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for having me. This is the second time I've been here in person, and it's delightful to be back. And it's a pleasure to see some of these faces I've only seen on Zoom screens. And also thank you for being awake in this soggy, humid space today. We'll see how that goes. So the title of my talk, What's a Bodhisattva to Do? Ponderings of a Buddhist Economist. I really want to spend a bit of time with the title. We can come to this practice with a whole lot of concepts in our heads, all sorts of ideas about Buddhism and about economics, the hybrid of this talk. When I first met my teacher, Diane Benaj Roshi at Mount Equity, I thought that monastic life was removed from everyday activity. I thought that somehow it was elevated and very special. Some of it could have been the visual impact of seeing people in black robes with shaved heads. Some of it could also be that I had formulated these ideas that any monastic person in an Asian tradition was on a mountaintop, and somehow they were just elevated from all of us. I thought that they sat all day and chanted sutras and sat zazen and wrote and read all of these great works that are available. And they did all those things. But one day, a young Japanese nun who was visiting came to me. She had obviously sensed my misunderstanding, and she said, "We do most of the things you do at home, but we do them. We're trained to do them in a different way, perhaps with a different attitude or quality of being." That took me by surprise, and it was a long time before I really understood what she was saying. It was even longer that I developed some glimmer of what Diane meant when she said our spiritual practice, which is guided and grounded in Zazen, can be seamless. It can flow from cushion to breakfast to paying a credit card bill. It is all activity, and can be done in that attitude of practice. So my misunderstanding about the superiority of certain activities was similar to Dogen. And I felt pretty good then because I was in good company, right? And so Dogen too was corrected, and he recounts this in a fascicle in the Eihei Shingi called Instructions for the Head Cook. In Japanese, it's Tenzen Kyoku. There are slight variations on these stories, but these are from Moon and Dewdrop. The first story goes like this. One day after the noon meal, Dogen observed an elderly monk who was drying mushrooms in scorching hot sun. Dogen approached him and asked him why he didn't have someone else perform his responsibilities. He answered, "Others are not myself." Dogen responded, "You are right. I can see that your work is the activity of the Buddha Dharma, but why are you working so hard in this scorching sun?" To which he replied, "If I don't do it now, when else can I do it?" Each of us is an individually unique combination of causes and conditions. So the way that we express our bodhisattvness is going to be different. The others are not myself part of this story. Diane Roshi, a teacher, was a classical ballet dancer before she became a Zen priest. She trained in Japan, and Japanese was not her first language. So her way of expressing the Dharma, her way of teaching us, was primarily grounded in the body. She emphasized precise ritual choreography. Her sewing was graceful and totally immersed in every stitch. It was a deep and difficult practice for me. I grew up in a farm in North Dakota. My background includes years of studying, teaching economics. So my expression of the Dharma tends to be a hybrid of her physical way of teaching, but also my own tendencies toward bookishness and the pragmatism that I learned from growing up on a farm. And I think you'll see some of that in this talk. The koan for each of us, our life koan, is how to express the Buddha Dharma with our own unique life circumstances. It's taken me many years to formulate this talk. I have made so many starts on this that it's hard to even count them. It never seemed that the balance between Dharma and economics was right. And then I said to myself, if I don't do this now, when else am I going to do it? I also got tripped up a lot with words. What's a Buddhist? What's an economist? That brings me to the second story from Dogen's Instructions for the Cook. When Dogen and his teacher at the time, Nanshin arrived in China, Dogen encountered an elderly monk who had come to the court to purchase mushrooms for a soup. Dogen was intrigued by his conversation and asked him to stay on the ship and not make the long journey back to his monastery. The elderly monk declined. He said, "Being the head cook is my responsibility. It is my pursuit of the way." The Tenzo laughed and said to Dogen, "You have much to learn about practice, and you have much to learn about the meaning of words." When Dogen asked what are words and what is practice, the elderly monk bolted. Okay? He came back months later, so the story goes, and he answered Dogen's questions in this way. You want to understand words, you must look into what words are. If you want to practice, you must understand what practice is. Dogen asked again, what are words? The Tenzo said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Dogen answered, asked, what is practice? The Tenzo said, nothing in the universe is hidden. Dogen later explains in this fascicle, he came to see 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What does this mean? He's telling us to understand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we need to go beyond words. We need to go beyond our conceptual understanding of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if practice means that nothing in the universe is hidden, what that means to me is our practice is to act, which is to look, to see. And what are we looking at? We're looking at the true self that includes everything. So we aren't frogs or rocks. Words are useful. However, if we don't live the practice through activity, which is how we clarify and express our lives, words remain concepts in the book. I'm going to add also, anything I say is a concept too. My admonition is to go out there and test it out. How we express the Dharma that is beyond words can be our daily activity as mothers, fathers, friends, drivers, whatever it is, attorneys, bridge builders, priests, gardeners. What's different from the worldly way of engaging any of those activities is the quality of being. It's what we bring to that activity. So how do we cultivate this attitude in that comes from Zazen? As Uchiama Roshi says in How to Cook Your Life, which is his commentary about this fascicle, behind Zazen is the Buddhist teaching. Behind the Buddhist teaching, there has to be one's own life experience. So let's talk specifically about these two words, Buddhist and economist. First of all, economics isn't finance. Economics is not about how to make more money. Greed is good, does not come from economics. It comes from a movie called Wall Street. Look it up, folks. Monetary economics is one field within economics, but it's not about making money. So is environmental economics within the scope. That was one of Tony's fields. Public sector economics, which was one of my fields, urban economics, international economics. There is a whole range of areas in which the economists apply our foundation for analysis. Some of my research was aimed at studying the influence of personal income taxes and natural amenities like sunshine or absence of it on people's decision of where to live. As an economist, I viewed myself mostly as an interpreter of human decision making. This is both from a perspective of a consumer or a firm. Also, we studied the consequences, mostly distributional consequences, who gains, who loses, and so forth. If one views economics as synonymous with money-making or fame or status, and is familiar with any of Dogen's writing, I can understand the perception that Buddhists and economists were completely at odds with one another. Dogen's teachings to Zen monastics on the pursuit of fame and fortune and status is quite unsparing, and it is very direct. I'll give you just a couple of examples. One is from Shogo Genzo's Rimokti. If we have much wealth, we will definitely lose the aspiration to practice. He really gets worked up in the Gyoji festival of Shogo Genzo. Here's what he says: loving fame is worse than breaking a precept. Breaking a precept is a transgression at a particular time. Loving fame is the ailment of a lifetime. Do not foolishly hold on to fame, nor do not ignorantly accept it. As I read Dogen on fame, fortune, and status, his point is the Dharma dies when monastics grasp for material gain, and they can become vulnerable in his time to the power of the state and the aristocracy if they accept favors and rewards. He often sounds like the Bible's admonitions to all of us. Here are two examples from the Bible. Timothy chapter 7, verse 10. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and by some longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Notice, it's love of money is the root of all evil, not money is the root of all evil. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, make sure that your character is free from love of money, being content with what you have. There are many Buddhist teachings that provide guidance for us in negotiating the material world. Dana, or generosity, is an antidote to greed. It is the first perfection, or paramita. It's also the first of Dogen's 4 methods of guidance. The Eightfold Path includes right livelihood. In Dogen's 8 qualities of a Bodhisattva, which is from the Buddha's last teaching, the first of 8 are having few desires. The second is knowing enough, or knowing satisfaction. The first of these is having few desires. And if you've read this, you said, wow, he doesn't say having no desires. He says having few desires. At the same time, I was really digging into that one. I reread Katagiri Roshi's Returning to Silence. Here's what he says about this one. Broadly speaking, without desire, how can we survive in this world? His advice is to, quote, understand how to use attachment without creating too much trouble. If you see trouble, confine the trouble to a minimum. Consider carefully what to do. Use your knowledge and your capability, and then whatever you decide to do, just do it. Do your best to accomplish it from beginning to end. See the result, accept it. Just continue to sow good seeds from moment to moment. That's shikantaza. All delusions, doubts, distractions drop off. So before we begin to discuss being 21st century Bodhisattvas, it can be really tempting to try to distance yourself from the responsibilities we have today and say, oh, you know, the Dogen and the Buddha had it great. Their world was just so much simpler. Well, it was simpler in many, many, many ways. I would discourage you from not idealizing the world they lived in for two reasons. One, the most obvious one, is our practice is here and now. We're not living in those times. And while today's world is certainly more complex, the political and economic systems of the Buddhist and Dogen's times were not gentle, egalitarian, or kind. The palace where the Buddha lived, for example, I can assure you was not built by the Bucknell University. It was built by the sweat and blood of the lowest castes. In Dogen's time, the late Heian and early Kamakura periods in Japan, Buddhist temples were built and monks were supported in a system of patronage, power, and wealth. Historians claim that prior to the 12th century, the well-known Buddhist temples uniquely served the needs of the state and the aristocracy who supported them. Commoners at the bottom of the class system didn't mix with the aristocracy. In fact, what they did is to work for the monks who had the status of being landlords in these temples. So commoners most likely held a view of monks as landlords and as politicians more than relievers of suffering. In their times, wealth was a reward, and it was a reward for political or military or religious power or status. Wealth was a surplus to be taken by conquest or to be appropriated from the lower classes. This is really important for us to understand that. So no wonder Dogen's teaching was so pointed, so direct, and so explicit. Now, our current economic system has its way of creating suffering. It is a system that can transmit and amplify the three poisons, greed, jealousy, and ignorance, in an instant with an account number and the click of a mouse. It has features that are very, very good at tapping into our propensities to acquire more and more and more, and at creating income and wealth disparities. It is the ground of our practice. I will repeat that again, I'm sure. But it's different from these earlier times, I believe, is the way in which those three poisons can be expressed. Because the world we have is complex and we have access to so much information, I sometimes feel paralyzed in making a decision. For example, the Buddha and Dogen walked everywhere. If we wish to travel, it can be by bike, or train, or car, or bus, fly. Let's say we decide to purchase a new car, small, electric, hybrid, make, model, price. It can be a really overwhelming decision. Apparently, the sense of paralysis in decision-making is not new. I found a lesson from Dogen Shinji Chobo Genzo. It's the one with 301 koan stories. Here's one of the stories in that particular writing from Dogen. Here's the story. Master Shokai in the Shoshu district said to his assembly, About to take one step, we become confused by thoughts. About to step back, instantly we lose the facts. Standing without moving, we are like an inanimate object. And a monk asked Choke, how can I avoid being an inanimate object? The master said, move, change direction, act. The monk said, how can I avoid being confused by thoughts or losing the facts? The master said, step forward, step back. There's a brief commentary in the version of these koan stories from Budo Nashijima. Here's what he says. When we have the intention to do something, our mind becomes full of ideas and alternatives, and we're sometimes confused and find it difficult to act. If we decide to hold back and do nothing, we often miss the right time to act. We lose sight of the circumstances and miss the chance. When we act, just doing something changes our own state of mind and the circumstances. That's been very beneficial to me. Now, are you convinced that the material world and the Dharma world aren't separate? Are you convinced? So far, is it that the material world is where we bodhisattvas can express ourselves? Here are some of the ponderings that I've promised. In economics, there's an empirical phenomenon called the Easterlin paradox. The Easterlin paradox finds that past some level of income and wealth, which varies across countries and across time periods, there is no additional life satisfaction or happiness to more wealth or more income. Robert Frank, who's a Cornell University economist, argues that the pursuit of more income or wealth, in other words, an explanation for this paradox, the pursuit of more is self-defeating because of how we get more. What we tend to do is trade off the stuff that really waters those good seeds, the happiness or the sense of satisfaction. The stuff that we trade off, like nature, spending time with family or friends, those are the things that we usually compromise to get more stuff. And that more stuff, as we all know from consuming, the glow of it sometimes wears off pretty quickly. So, why do we do this? We do this in part because of the pond we swim in. That's the language from Robert Frank. Or our social networks, the keeping up with the Joneses. In Dharma speak, the world in which I live out myself is influenced by my actions, and I am influenced by it. I found that Zen centers often offer really good examples of how to live simply. But because our practice is our own little personal project, we can support and nurture our sanghas. We can expand our concept of sangha beyond Zen centers and share the desire to live simply with others as bodhisattva activity. Let me give you an example. I doubt that Tommy and I are unusual in that we have a very, very close friend who has difficulty resisting the urge to shop and has accumulated a lot of credit card debt. Several years ago, we traveled with her to show her a different way of being in the world, not preaching, showing activity. We took long walks in parks, no shopping malls, long walks in beautiful, beautiful parks for which there were no fees even. We enjoyed picnic lunches instead of expensive restaurant meals. We made purchases with very clear intention, and we made those purchases in cash. This is parental mind in Dogen's instructions for their head cook. David Lloyd, a Buddhist writer and eco-dharma advocate, has written extensively on the psychology of why we overconsume. And I want to share just a little bit of that too, because some of you may not be familiar with his body of work. He first makes the connection between dukkha, sometimes translated as suffering, and the illusion of a separate self. The individual self, conceiving the self as separate, is insecure, and it feels a sense of lack. Since we think we're separate from everything, and we encounter and experience dukkha, we look outside ourselves for relief, and that can take many forms, you name it. We grasp for things outside ourselves that fulfill this sense of lack. He calls them lack projects. Things outside ourselves cannot alleviate our suffering because the source of suffering is not out there, it's in here. I encourage all of you to become familiar with this writing if you're interested in this topic. There are two books. One is Mindfulness in the Marketplace, and another called Hooked, Buddhist Writings on Greed, Desire, and the Urge to Consume. I've also found it really helpful on Taigen Layton's website. He has an Eco-Sattva vow, which we recite periodically. It's on his website at Ancient Dharma. If we begin to practice with Dogen's 8 qualities of a Bodhisattva and those 2 characteristics that I mentioned earlier, I have found that a good way to work with having few desires and knowing satisfaction that doesn't water lots of seeds of judginess. Practice with food. You have to do it a couple of times a day. It's very physical, it's apparent. I found it to be a really, really deep practice. I make up a menu, and that's to limit desires and impulse purchases before we go to the grocery store. And once we purchase food, it's the food that determines when we consume it, as opposed to our wants. Check the pantry, those pesky little places in the back of the refrigerator. Know that. It's also really useful for me to remind me that wasting food or being disrespectful of food is to respect all of what made that food possible. There's a really beautiful Thich Nhat Hanh Neale. Part of it goes like this. This food is the gift of the whole universe, the earth, the sky, and much harder than the May I live in a way that makes us worthy to, makes me worthy to receive it. That first time I heard the earth, the sky, and much harder than the Lord, it really spoke very loudly to me, in part because of my background on a North Dakota farm. I understand that deeply, intimately. So find things like that really, really work for you. That tap in to your life experience to make them deep and real. Let's focus on food again for the second quality, knowing satisfaction or knowing enough. In our Zen monastic tradition, sesshin for me is a really, really good way of being in touch with the food, with my own body, in this practice of knowing enough, eating in accordance with the bodily requirements of work practice. Zen monasteries typically do feature sometimes hard physical labor outside working on building projects, but also sewing. So learn to read your body, to be aware of the circumstances is really useful in knowing enough. But the pandemic taught some really useful lessons on knowing enough. Back to food. Even though I carefully planned our menus, there were times, and maybe some of you experienced this, that I didn't have enough of a particular ingredient, or we'd used too much of an ingredient in a prior meal. What then? Well, we didn't make another trip to the grocery store. But if we do, we improvise. And sometimes we did with them. Some of those improvised recipes were actually very creative and real. And improvising really brought out some of that lived vitality that can come about in a recipe that you made 15 times. There's some disruptor that wakes you up. There's now another aspect, and maybe some of you looking around in this room, maybe some of you have experienced this. I find the example I'm about to use of knowing enough to be a very challenging. Knowing enough is also influenced by my sense of impermanence. Mine and the world we built that supports my life. Both my parents were from the Depression era. While I was working, and I was at Bucknell 31 years back, while I was working there, I saved. Those were indelible lessons that my parents taught me. When I retired, looked at all the financial stuff and said to myself, is this enough? My view of enough at this life stage is greatly affected by my view of my longevity, which is unknowable, and also the institutions that we've created that support my financial well-being. So financial markets, Social Security, and you know what? I can't control any of this. And it bugs me. It's a deep project here to let go of that and to just say, it's up to the universe. Some of you are at a different life stage and you have children whom you love very much. How much is enough to provide for their well-being? Back to category erosion. Use your knowledge, your capability, to decide what to do. Do it. Do your best to accomplish whatever it is from beginning to end. See the result and accept it. Just continue to grow good seeds. I have a few other examples, and these deal directly with the interconnection of our economic decisions. And sometimes there are uneasy consequences to these. And that's a good thing. Why? That's where our practice is. That's when transformation is possible. So let's look at some of these I've cooked up for us today. We can study our consumer decisions in ways that open us to our fixed, rigid views. For example, one of the reasons we can all sit here and share the Dharma is because other people are out there doing work that supports our lives, right? Other people growing food as farmers, other people who are assisting in making the financial and insurance pieces of this building, people who are making sure our water supply is available and pure. That's reality. And in our world now, we are more interconnected in that way than maybe we've ever been before. At the same time, we're individually vulnerable because our economic well-being depends on so many other people. So it depends on the strength of the ties that bind us together as individuals and nations. This was a valuable lesson from the pandemic. How many of you have ever really thought about supply chains until the pandemic? Building on that idea, try to look at your breakfast in the morning. It is an incredible accomplishment that your breakfast was available, what you wanted, when you wanted it. Let's say it was oatmeal and soy milk. We're among the fortunate ones who had breakfast that day. But I also want you to consider this. Interconnection in the marketplace includes everything and everyone, including people who made your breakfast possible. It is highly likely that among those people, the truck driver, farmer, banker, who contributed to making your food, your life possible, holds ideologies and values that are very different from yours. There's no escaping that. None at all. When we acknowledge our differences and our dependence, it creates a little crack in the walls that we've constructed to separate us. We can use our material connections to cultivate a more magnanimous mind. Think of that. The wealthier we are, the more power we have in the marketplace. Those with more purchasing power, more income and wealth, have the capacity and the greatest say in creating a world that's consistent with their values. So what do we do about that? And I'm talking to us, not the top 1/10 of 1%, although some of you may do that. But I'm talking to us. Where we live is an economic decision and has important consequences for the environment, for water supplies, for congestion. It also has other consequences. As a nation, we've become more segregated by income and wealth. Look around, we see that. Because of the manner in which we finance our public schools, this has consequences. Where we live has consequences for school districts and school quality. And that perpetuates income and wealth inequality. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you should send your children to schools that are bad, or to condemn anyone who sends their children to schools that are determined to be good. The decision has consequences beyond the advantages of one's own children. The point here isn't to judge. The point is to say that advantage, in this case a created advantage, has consequences. And that seeing those consequences, taking that advantage, and using it responsibly to benefit all others is probably a good idea in the Dharma. Also, there's nothing wrong with pursuing a goal toward ending coal mining. But while pursuing environmental goals, let's also consider the disruption to the lives of the workers and the residents of those towns who for generations have depended on coal for a livelihood. What can we do as people who do not bear these costs? What can we do to relieve human suffering that's associated with changes we want to see in the world? I would be remiss if I didn't mention work. Some of you may have at times felt degraded by practices in the workplace that are based on comparisons, and promotions and monetary rewards can create this perception of our value. When I felt that way, and I did fairly frequently while I was a university professor, I looked at that and I was distracted from the view of why I wanted to teach, why I wanted to be a university professor. It was the greatest gig in the world. I got to teach, got to do my research, served on some committees. That's why I was doing what I was doing. It wasn't for the monetary rewards, but it was easy to be distracted from that sometimes. From the Zen kitchen to enlightenment in Chandler, Roshi points out, when we no longer see ourselves as cogs in the wheel of society and awaken to the true self in a total sense, the meaning of our lives is bound to change. There is no need to compare ourselves with those around us. Rather, it is vital for us to take the utmost care of that world in which we live out the total self. So, to conclude, the title of this was, What's a Bodhisattva to Do? Ponderings of a Buddhist Economist. What's the answer to my question? First, understand deeply our lived practice includes financial and economic decisions, the decisions we make in our everyday life. Please start there. Then, be diligent and constant in your practice as you navigate this messy, complicated world and live out this one precious life with wisdom and compassion for self and others. That's my answer to the question of what's a bodhisattva to do. Thank you very much.
Would you like to entertain questions or reflections?
Yeah, let's have at it. I'm sure there were a few buttons pushed there, right?
Nanshin?
Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. It was wonderful. I have often or recently admitted that I have a pretty dysfunctional relationship with money. And it has played out in my life for a long time. And I've recently, partly because of my practice here, kind of rethought and started to act differently and treat it differently. So I really appreciate what you've got to say. And I know the difference in the way I feel when I approach money as part of my practice rather than this other thing I'm trying to manage and fix and drive me crazy. So thank you. I just want to say thank you for your appreciation.
And thank you for that observation. It's a very important one.
Nanshin? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to add on to that, I contemplated, my relationship with money in terms of, being embedded in investments and, dedicated to the need for Medicare and how that, wraps me into certain political perspectives. And find myself, going from comfort to complete discomfort to terror almost. And, I find myself sometimes wanting to back away from that. It's like just go meditate, which is fine, it's good to go meditate and sit on your cushion to get forward some sense of equanimity. But I find myself also having to be really careful about not doing a lot of spiritual bypassing in that way. But I have to go back to the messiness of, that system in which I'm embedded deeply and feel, and I want to run away from the discomfort, but I have to stay with the discomfort because that's where my life is right now. So I want to thank you for acknowledging that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Yeah, it's not easy. There's another dimension to that too. If we think about those of us with gray hairs in the room and thinking about our the viability of the institutions that are created that are so important in our lives. The other dimension of that is very much prevalent in my thinking is I tend to get really obsessed and insecure about my own well-being. And when I start to open it up and think about future generations and the resources that we might command that may not be available to people who are much younger.
And that's so true because when I engage with my children in my discussions about money and realize their position is so different, their relationship is so different, and how can we continue to be in dialogue with each other?
I just wanted to ask a little bit more about your practices surrounding food and eating, and also just to mention that the point you made about how, the people that support us, whether it's farming, truck driving, working in coal plants, and all of that other kind of stuff, have, likely very different political, ideological, philosophical views, and how, those people all support us. I was deeply touched by that, so thank you for raising that point.
Very is to see them. And when we see something that is, let's say, a violation of our deeply held and potentially rigid views, that person is probably instrumental in a very real way, not in an abstract way, in a very real way, contributing to our lives.
I have a question as well. I'm on Zoom right now.
Yes, you are.
So my partner and I, we have very different relationships with money. He grew up in a family where they experienced a lot of poverty. So he lived on survival mode for many years. And even as an adult, he never seems to have enough. And it hurts me to see him suffering because of that feeling of lack. So I want to know, what are some practices that you recommend for me to be okay with that without feeling the need to push him in any way?
Well, I think you've already answered much of your question there, because you know that pushing him to your point of view probably is not going to work. It just adds to already the suffering that he's experienced from growing up without. That's a very difficult one, because knowing enough is not limited to just people who are wealthy. People who are on the other end of the income and wealth distribution certainly have some of those same ideas. But at least for myself, I grew up with a stable but materially we were not well off. But the advantage was that I lived in a community where it was a farm community in the 1950s and 60s. And we all looked the same cards. There weren't the signifiers of wealth that we have today. And so it was a very different experience. But I think for me, a big lesson was that especially my grandmother, that you can have a lot of money and not be satisfied. And that was a really important lifelong lesson to me, is that money doesn't resolve all of our difficulties. I would start with those gentle reminders and not rigid rules.
Thank you.
Yes,
I wonder if you'd have any comments. It seems that it's really hard to talk about money in religious settings or spiritual settings. Mm-hmm. You've got the unique combination of having been an economist. Do you have any comments on that, of what you've seen and how it works for you?
Have you been reading my emails lately? Another Zen teacher made the same comment, that money seems to be one of the last taboo subjects among Sanghas. And I wrote to say, I really have no problem. It's one of my favorite subjects for Dharma talks, because it creates resistance. But if it's done in a way that is not, I hate rich people, then, there are subtle ways to do this. And I hope that I succeeded in pushing some buttons without saying, I never want to hear this subject again. And yes, that comes from that background, but I am not exaggerating. My Dharma teacher, Diane, constantly encouraged me to write and speak about this topic. And that meant so much to me, because there's something there. And I give her, I'm so deeply grateful to her. But putting it together has taken a long time. I remember the first time I did a talk on this subject, one of the people walked out and was not too happy and just said, I'm not going to give up my BMW. And I said, well, I'm not asking you to give up your BMW. Just understand it could go away. And so it does. It's a subject that's very sensitive. And especially in this polarized environment in which we live, because my view is part of our political polarization is rooted in the inequalities of income and wealth. And you have to start to understand that. Thank you, John.
Nanshin, thank you so much for coming here and bringing your wisdom, the depth of your practice, integrating into a particular place where you have invested so much heart. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.